everyone. It is your girl, Marcy Thomas, and I'm here with you for another episode of BGC Book Club. So come on in the room and get ready as we really dive into a wonderful conversation that's going to bring up a lot of things that we are often thinking about here in the here and now as we navigate the world as African Americans in this country. So come on in and let us know where you're joining from if you don't mind. I am coming to you from the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia, by way of birth in Cleveland, Ohio. So I've got my Midwest side, and I'm also a little bit of a Southern girl as well. So if this is your first time here, you will find that this is a space where we are always celebrating books that are by, for, and about us, from historical fiction to nonfiction to just a bunch of wonderful stories that really just talk about Black women specifically, but Black culture around the world across the diaspora. So tonight, I'm really excited about our guest, Maura Cheeks, who has recently published Acts of Forgiveness. You can see I got my little tabs. Y'all always know when I have tabs, it was good for me because I have to put some things in there to make sure I don't forget to discuss. But Maura has published writing in the New York Times, The Atlantic, the Paris Review, and Tin House, among others. In 2019, she was awarded a masthead reporting residency with The Atlantic, where she produced the feature-length article that would later inspire the idea for Acts of Forgiveness, which we'll be talking about tonight, and which also her first novel. So without any further delay, let's welcome Maura to the BGC Book Club. Welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Oh, yes, it's definitely a pleasure to have you. As I told you, as we were preparing to come on, that I love the book. I'm glad that you took the time and the energy and put all the efforts towards writing it. So I just want to congratulate you and thank you at the same time.
Thank you for reading it, and I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Oh, yes. So we got someone who's saying, they have a conference call, but yes, please come back and watch later. This is going to be a good conversation. Thank you, Laura. Appreciate you. So, Maura, how does it feel, this first book baby that you've put out into the world?
It has been a joyous experience, really. It's been really fun to just hear people's reactions to the book. And, I finished writing it I started writing it in 2019. I finished writing it about a year and a half ago at this point. And so I took a little break, obviously, from the characters. And then when the book was, about to be released, sort of dove back into it. And it's been really, refreshing and energizing to hear everyone's response to it.
Yes, it's definitely something that provides a whole lot of food for thought. And, we're going to dive into all of that here momentarily, but it's very well written. There's history, there's current day stuff. I mean, there's just so many things that, we can think about and, of course, talk about. So I definitely suggest to people, y'all hear me say it a lot, but I really do suggest that this is a book that you go ahead and grab a copy of, because it really is going to make you think about a lot of things. So for anyone who hasn't had an opportunity to read Acts of Forgiveness yet, in general, what is the story about?
So the story imagines that the country has passed the nation's first reparations bill for Black families, and it follows 4 generations of the Revel family as they are retracing their lineage in order to be eligible for the funds, while also navigating the ups and downs of a family business.
Yes, and it is something to think about, because we oftentimes will hear the conversation about reparations, but what it actually looks like. You give us some insight into what it would look like if that actually was to occur. Now, is there a specific point in time that this book is taking place in?
Yeah, so I left the year ambiguous on purpose because I didn't want people to sort of benchmark it against Trump and try and think like, oh, this is before Trump or this is after him. So it's purposefully, a little bit ambiguous, but it's meant to feel as though it's present day, as though it could be now and the act could be passing as the world exists as it does today.
Absolutely. And Phyllis was just saying, I don't know if you saw that. Phyllis from Houston said she enjoyed the novel. So thank you for chiming in, Phyllis. I hope you got some good insight and questions that you can ask along the way. But yes, that is something as I was reading, there were definitely things that felt current, just looking at the things that were happening with the family, with the Revel family in the book, as just well as things that were happening in the world around them. And that also helped me to see or that it really doesn't matter what time we're in. There's some things that in the world, in this nation specifically, as things exist, time isn't so much a factor because we know that until things drastically change, which may not be in our lifetimes, there's going to be a lot of things that, a specific date or a specific year isn't really going to matter. So
yeah, that's also what I wanted to explore, right? Which is that could you read this book and understand that it could be 10 years ago or it could be today. And so that's part of like I said, I started writing it in 2019, and then obviously during 2020, George Floyd was murdered, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and we had all of these events that made the conversation of reparations different than it was when I first started writing the book. And it kind of confirmed my choice not to include a year. There was a little bit of pushback from my editor about, wanting to have a firmer timeline. And I wanted to sort of make that statement for the book that it could exist today, hopefully not 10 years from now, but the fact that that the time is sort of fluid because of the history of this country.
Mm-hmm. Now, as I stated in your introduction, that it was actually an article that you wrote that inspired the idea for acts of forgiveness. So what was the article centering around?
Yeah, so the article was exploring the racial wealth gap in the country and looking at why the average white family has about 6 times more wealth than the average Black family, and looking at those systemic choices throughout our legal system that have created that gap. And so, yeah, I spent about 4 to 5 months writing the article. And then when I finished the article, I had interviewed a professor named Sandy Darity for the book. He has written a book called From Here to Equality with his wife with A. Kirsten Mullen. And, they've done a lot of work to understand what a federal reparations policy could look like. And so when I finished writing the article, I sort of, I had all of these questions about like, well, why actually haven't we pursued this? And what would it look like if we did? And sort of, I had this desire to sort of like move past the point where we seem to get stuck in this country, which is thinking about what would have to happen for it to pass. And instead, I wanted to start the book at a point where, okay, it's going to pass. And now what?
Yeah, and that's something, we're going to dive into that here shortly, but just to even think about that, because we know in this current political climate, be like, nope. Yeah. But, but it's just it's a thought that it just brought up a lot in reading it. And for those like Phyllis, you've already read it. For others who get a chance to, it just brings up so many thoughts about, what could be good about it, what might not be good about it, what hoops we might have to jump through, what things we may have to experience in order to make it happen, and all of that. Who's entitled, who's not. I mean, these are all things that you really tap into in the book. But you start off with, which I'd love for you to share, as you mentioned already, is the story of a family, 4 generations within a family, and kind of where it starts off and how we begin to know this family and understand where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I definitely wanted it to be centered around a family. I think, one, because that's how I relate to books and fiction, but also because when we talk about reparations in the country, it often gets stuck in politics and statistics, and for some reason the humanity behind it gets lost. And so I wanted to really focus on the family and explore all of the complications of what it means for it to pass, like the complicated emotions that every family member has. Not every family member wants it to pass, or they want it to pass, but they have reservations about what it means, and if it's worth going through the hassle of proving what they need to prove in order to be able to be eligible for the money. So yeah, I wanted to have the four generations to sort of show the various opinions of the Forgiveness Act.
Mm-hmm. And could you share a little bit from the prologue, just so we can,
sure.
so that we can see how it starts and get a little feel for your writing? I know Phyllis knows, but others may not know yet.
So this is from the prologue. Marcus Revel was willing to trade the illusion of his sanity to keep his home. The day before, neighbors found signs taped lopsidedly to telephone poles, slid under their front doors, and swirling around the playground. Last chance yard sale, 237 Horter Street. Saturday, 6 a.m. to come for the food, stay for the history you make. Beautiful antiques, funky knickknacks, help me get my house back. The signs had appeared overnight, scribbled in what appeared to be red crayon on the backs of paper bags. But that wasn't what startled the neighbors. No, the signs were confusing because everyone knew Marcus Revel didn't own his house. Like most of them, he had traded his life savings and his John Hancock for a promise. So Marcus Revel drew a large crowd in part because his neighbors wanted to see what the signs really meant, and in part because the signs were wholly out of character for the quiet, respectable man they knew Marcus Revel to be. The Marcus Revel they knew hid signs of indignity beneath clean clothes and a well-maintained beard, not tacked onto public spaces. By 10 a.m., the small audience in front of Marcus's house looked like the type of crowd one might see when firemen talk a man off a ledge. The old folks gripped coffee mugs while staring wide-eyed at the lawn, the melodrama adding color to their cheeks. Mrs. Solomon squeezed the hand of the 5-year-old daughter she had just adopted from Macon, Georgia. A follower of Father Divine offered to lead a prayer session. Marcus's best friend, Al, tried to get people off the sidewalk and into the yard to make a purchase or two, while Marcus's 8-year-old son, Max, strutted around the yard, fingering old toys like an underpaid store clerk. The entire scene was buttressed by the smell of Marcus's barbecue, wafting under the noses of his neighbors, as Marcus focused his attention on the baby back ribs that needed slathered. As much slathering as it would take for him to forget how low he had sunk. Mrs. Solomon clicked her tongue. Imagine, ribs at this hour. What could Marcus be thinking? But still, she didn't move, and neither did anyone else. Al attempted to persuade Marcus to abandon the grill and say something to the crowd. They want to know why they are here, Marcus. They want to know what the hell is going on. Marcus hated public speaking, but he hated the idea of being homeless more. He walked from the grill to the edge of his manicured lawn and wiped his hands on his apron. I want to thank you all for coming out here so early and spending your Saturday morning with me, he said, looking at no one in particular. Marcus paused. I'm behind on my payment to Mr. Frederick, he said, touching his short black beard and clearing his throat. I owe him $300, and he said he will take my house from me if I don't get it to him by Monday. Please understand I am a proud man, and this is not easy, but all I want is to provide a home for my son, and so here I am, offering what I can. Mrs. Solomon cast her eyes downward. Others felt cherry pits in their throats. The old folks shook their heads. They didn't want to see Marcus Revel pleading on his front lawn to keep a house that wasn't even his. Who is that? Lord Solomon whispered, pointing at Marcus during a speech. That is Mr. Marcus Revel, so Mrs. Solomon answered her new daughter. And please don't point, she admonished, folding Lourdes's finger back into her palm. Is he crazy? No, baby, just sad and desperate is all. Stop there.
Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you. But I mean, that just speaks volumes in that beginning, because we get to see, you know, the history of this family, and what Marcus was dealing with was really no different from what a lot of families may have suffered through. Just trying to hold on, you know, keep the head above water, as they used to say, you know, but, you know, just that the desperation that he would do that, and that would be kind of the jumping off point for where the story is, and also where his son, you know, at that point at 8 years old, makes a decision about how he wants to live.
Mm-hmm. He'll never be in that position.
Right. And how many of you know, how many children make those kind of positions? I say it often is you end up being just like, you know, the self-fulfilling prophecy of your family, or you try to get as far away from that as you possibly can,
and then end up being like them anyway. But
right.
Yeah, I mean, the part of that is inspired by Ta-Nehisi's article, "The Case for Reparations."
Mhm.
There's an interview in the beginning of that, where someone's talking about getting their house and sort of getting conned into the contractual deal. So
Right, Mayor. We know that historically there's been a lot of those sorts of dealings where, people will tell you, oh, sell you a bill of goods, and then it turns out to be not what you thought it was going to be, or people might be paying thinking that they're paying towards owning the house. At the end of the
right,
day, they don't own the house.
right.
So all of those sorts of things. So, that's where it starts. But then we see later in the next part of the book where we're actually starting to look more at his granddaughter. She becomes a central character that we follow her journey, Wilhelmina, or Willie, as she is known, and some of the decisions that she has to make in life just to be a part of the family and, to help the family stay afloat. So, what made you want to kind of center the story more on her versus maybe centering it on Max, who is Marcus's son?
Well, I wanted to explore the gender dynamic of what women are often asked to give up for their families, and those choices that they make. And so, it's called the Forgiveness Act throughout the book for the bill, but then there's also this theme of forgiveness in terms of what the women have to or choose to forgive so that their family can remain together and remain functioning. Um, and so, yeah, for me, it was sort of exploring both of those layers of like the family obligation, but then specifically family obligation for women.
Yes, and it is something to see because there is a brother, there are two, and I just realized when you were reading that Lourdes was actually
Yeah.
like, look, the girl next door, so to speak.
Yeah.
I missed that when I was reading it when you just said, oh, okay, so these kids grew up next to each other and they wind up getting
Yeah.
married and having their own family. But just to see, and even the way that Lourdes is, so we
Mhm.
get to see kind of two different sides of that. We see a woman who maybe doesn't have a strong career because the husband wants her to live a certain way, and then a daughter who's very determined to do some things on her own.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I sort of in each woman, Lourdes, Willie, Paloma, you get sort of like different aspects of forgiveness and sort of like how they've chosen to forgive within their own little sphere of like being able to exist. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But with Willie specifically, since she is like a central character, and Paloma, the two kind of coming together, we see her, having a desire to have a certain career. And, she, you know, as a young lady, she is kind of pushed away from being in the family business at a certain point, but then ends up having to come back to support the family business anyway.
Mhm.
So that's that big decision. And just to think of how many times has a young woman have had to make that decision of am I going to be the one that supports the family, or am I going to go ahead and do what I want to do, and how is that going to impact my relationship with the family, but even how does that impact my relationship with myself? In
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, I wanted to explore, you get this with Paloma a little bit too, but um, like the extent to which there's freedom to pursue dreams and like have those dreams support you financially. And
Mm,
so with Willie, you sort of, I don't think this is a spoiler, but she gets very close to
right.
being able to support herself. And there's different sort of debates about what supporting yourself means financially for her. It would have meant living a certain life in New York, and whether that was financial stability that her mom approved of, probably not. And
Right.
so, yeah, so I also just wanted to explore like who gets the opportunity to pursue these sort of creative passions or their dreams and actually make a living from it versus taking the more reliable path.
Right. And then also looking at she has a brother who, and
Does
it's like,
whatever he wants.
yeah, he can do whatever he wants, and like he's encouraged to do that, which is kind of wild. Because, like I said, this isn't giving anything away, but of course, they're growing up together, and you would think, it's a construction business that her father owns, and you would think that the thing would be to push the son to be in the business or want the son to be in the business, but it's like, oh, he can go and do whatever he wants.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think it hopefully builds on that theme of obligation, gendered obligation, right? And so he makes it very clear early in the book that he has no desire to be part of the business, and he's not pressed to join it. And there's also not the sense that he's the one that can save them.
Right. Because, in all honesty, we see Willie. I mean, there is a skill set that she has early on. So it's not so much that she couldn't, it's just the thing that she wasn't necessarily encouraged to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Mm-hmm. So, of course, some things happen, and she, is helping her family, but then of course this whole Forgiveness Act is out there floating around. They're kind of on the cusp of it getting ready to be approved, and so we see some of that, like how it has to go through the House and then the Senate and all of that. So my question to you is, in writing that, obviously you had to do a lot of research about how certain things work when a bill is about to pass, and filibusters and all these different things that can come up. So was that a tedious process to get into the political side of that?
It was. Yeah, I think it's hard, right? Because this has never actually passed. And so I was watching videos of similar filibusters and like trying to understand what the process might be like within a realistic framework of the book. And so, I did a lot of research to understand sort of the mechanics of the bill moving through the House and the Senate. And then if somebody were to speak up against it at this stage, what would happen? The book I mentioned by Professor Darity and A. Kirsten Mullen, it's called From Here to Equality. Highly recommend if someone is interested in learning more about the different reparations policies and what they could actually look like, because that book was really helpful to sort of understand the mechanics of it.
Mm-hmm. And in your book, it's $175,000, which, it is a lot of money, but if you think of
it's a realistic amount of money, right?
It really isn't when you think of what, people had to endure. Right. So, that's a whole thing. And in all honesty, with some of the things about reparations, I don't know if there ever has really been a dollar amount put on it per se.
Yeah. So I feel like I'm promoting their book instead of mine, but in that book, they there's different plans outlined and dollar amounts put against it. So, at the federal level, there's never been a specific dollar amount proposed, because the first what would happen first to have it pass nationally is HR 40 would have to pass, which is simply a commission to study the impact of slavery and put forth reparations proposals. So nothing can happen federally until that actually passes. So at the federal level, a number hasn't been put forward. And then there's a bunch of local policies that have passed. Like in Evanston, for example, they're giving $25,000, I believe is the amount, in housing grants if you can prove that you were a resident or the descendant of a resident in Evanston who experienced housing discrimination during a specific time period. So locally, there's been numbers attached to different proposals, but not federally.
Okay. Because I was just wondering, where did that amount come from? So
it came partially from the book. So one way they back into a number is to imagine, if Black people are 12% of the population in the US, what would be the number to get us to having 12% of the wealth?
Gotcha. Okay.
So that's like one example that they
Gotcha.
put forth. So I
But
sort
yeah,
of like cobbled some together to
yeah,
give, I wanted a number that would work for the book to make it seem, achievable.
right.
Yeah.
Everybody gets $1 million.
Right, right, right.
We know that would never happen.
Right, right. But
Yeah,
175, that's the first, that's a salary for some people. And so
right. It
it
is. It is.
is not out of the realm of possibility.
Right. But yes, but it definitely sounds like a lot of money when you don't have it. But
Yeah,
then if you think of what people had to endure, number
right,
one, and the fact that for a lot of people that would go like really fast.
right, right,
So 'cause think of the people who win millions of dollars in the lottery and they're broke the next year.
right.
So it's just a lot of things that pass through my mind in that process and been thinking about it. But just looking at the fact that this is something that's put out there, it is now it goes through a process where it's now made available, but it's not like you can just show up with your ID card and say, hey, I'm Black, I'm American, I was born here, give me my money, run me my coins. It's a whole process, which really is another aspect of the book that I really love the way that you dive into it. And it really made me think about my own life and journey. And that is, the whole thing of genealogy and, figuring out who you are and where you come from. And, tell us a little bit about your process of learning that, because that's a whole nother piece.
Yeah, well, I'm going to pull up this book that I have here because in the spirit of promoting another book, it's called Finding a Place Called Home.
Okay.
So if you are tracing tracing your genealogy, it specifically is for African Americans in terms of, here are the documents that you should look at if, this record has been destroyed or if you don't know the name of this person. So it's specifically for African Americans since a lot of the history was destroyed.
Right.
So I sort of like combed through that book to understand, if my character had these pieces of information, what would she find? Where would she look? And then I also went to Mississippi and met with the employees at the Mississippi Department of Archives and the Historic Natchez Foundation and, explained to them what my character was doing, where she was in her journey. And they showed me documents that she might see or find if she were doing that research. So yeah, I did a little bit of, that was some of the research I did. I was interested in it just based on my own family history and talking to my grandmother in terms of like what she could share and didn't know. And so I haven't gone too far in my own family tree, but I sort of like was initially interested in it because of my family.
Okay, because I was going to ask if there was a particular reason why, Mississippi, why Natchez, if there is a personal connection to those places.
No, there's not. But some of the information that she has sort of like mimics the information I have, but Willie goes much deeper than I have so far.
Right. But yes, it brings up so much because, of course, we see Paloma in a situation where she's in school and people are like asking her about, tell us where you came from, or, your family or these things that oftentimes that we don't know. And it's something that, a lot of people are oblivious to. That, as Black people, as Black Americans, we often don't know.
Right.
We can say, okay, we come from Chicago, we come from Mississippi, we come from Alabama, we come from Texas, we come from Georgia, but we can't say, with any kind of specificity where exactly we come from. A lot of us cannot.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always been sort of haunted by that a little bit. Like I have such a desire to know where my family, where I come from before here, haven't been able to go that far back yet. We were talking earlier, I've done like the ancestry DNA, so I have those percentages, but that's not for me, that's not as satisfying as understanding like specifically where your people are from. So
Right, absolutely. Because ancestry, as I was saying, I've done African ancestry, but that only gives me my mother's side. They're still there because I think if you think about it in a family, there are many, many lines within a family, within that family tree. So yeah, you might be able to get one or two, maybe, but there's a whole lot that still could be missing. And mine traces back to Sierra Leone in my mother's lineage, but I don't know about the others. But with her, it's like I was telling you earlier, I know that, but I don't necessarily know who all the people are in the generations.
mm-hmm.
Dad said I can go back a little bit further with who actual people are. And this I didn't tell you, I went to Alabama a couple months ago and went to the hometown where my great grandparents were born and where they started having their children. So yes, I've done some, but reading your book has really made me want to dive deeper.
And that's on your dad's side, you said?
Dad's side. So I'm in Atlanta. It's like that town is like 2 hours away from where I live.
Oh wow, that's crazy.
Take the time because one of the things, as you mentioned, a lot of times records are destroyed. There's information that you can't find. So we do watch Willie go through this whole process of going into archives, starting with one set and then diving deeper and deeper. And so that is a pretty major process that, you have to have the time and the resource and the energy to even be able to do that.
Well, right. And that comes up in the book of who can afford to fly down there and trace your records and who was the time to be able to take time off from work. So that's like a whole other set of privileges that so certain people would be allowed to prove their eligibility, whereas others might not.
Because that is a thought. And speaking of eligibility, another thing is when you have people who may be of different quote unquote classes financially, different social status, there could be things of people saying, well, Oprah doesn't deserve reparations.
I got an email from someone who said that exact same thing.
You heard somebody say that?
Well, they emailed me to tell me that.
Oh, okay. So there's that, of trying to do, having like a value judgment placed on, a person or persons who may not, deserve it should it ever come to be, because maybe they have achieved a certain level of status, in their careers or, how they're living and socially or whatever. But in my mind, it's like, does it matter though?
Well, that's also why I chose to explore a federal program.
Yes.
Because what I wanted to touch on was like the financial aspect, but also the spiritual aspect of what it means for the country to acknowledge that everyone who is an enslaved ancestor is worthy of it.
So so you did some really deep work. I know you said you started in 2019 and set it aside for a while to pull everything together, including all that research as well as just the crafting of the story itself. How long did it really take you to do all of that?
Well, I only set it aside. So I wrote it for about 4 years. So I started in 2019 and then I sold the book in 2021 roughly. And then, so I worked on it for about 4 years.
Okay. That's a labor of love while still doing other things in between and all of that.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah, it's something just to see and to think about, and this is for anyone who watches, just to think about that family history, because that's another thing, when you have opportunities to talk to people, your elders and things like that, trying to find out what you can.
Yeah.
We see some of that in the book as well.
Yeah. And I tried to, I think anyone who's tried to interview their elders, sometimes you don't know which questions to ask. Sometimes, and there's beauty in that, but also frustration. So maybe if you're asking certain questions, the stories kind of go where they may. But and then for Willie, she had a specific like list of questions that she's trying to get the answer to so that she can then prove the eligibility. But yeah, I think a lot of that came from, I often sit and talk with my grandfather. And so like pulling sort of like stories from that helped me build that portion of the book.
Right. And I just think it's so important though, because, in other conversations we may have talked about, we might talk about recipes or, things like that. But then there's, other family history. And I know a lot of times there may be, levels of trauma involved with it, which is understandable why people may not want to, do all of that remembering, so to speak, or bringing things back up. But then, for the stories that, they can tell, I think it's important for us to get them, because the time may come where you don't have those people who can share those stories any longer.
Yeah, it's really important to tap into that knowledge when you can, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. As I was mentioning, my grandfather's family went to their hometown. My grandfather's last sibling passed away a couple months ago. So it's like that line for me to get that information is on. So, I just have to kind of research and do some things on my own. So it's just important to do that.
Yeah.
But then also, to think that even within our families, because we see this as, we saw this as well in the book, is that everybody does not feel the same way about getting money from the government, basically, is what it is. And why people may have different feelings about that.
Yeah. Yeah, you see certain characters who think that it's a handout, or they don't think that it's, Max, Willie's dad, doesn't really think it's worth the time. Time is wasted. Let's just keep moving forward. So I wanted to sort of paint those different pictures of it wouldn't be as though it passes and then everyone's like, okay, great, like, let's go get the money, because it's more complicated than that. So
it's much more complicated than that, because I guess like with anything else, you have to consider like, what are the trade-offs if you go and get this money, for one, is a thing to consider. Are there any trade-offs? But then, as we see in the book, as happens in many of our lives, we may be making other trade-offs anyway. So it becomes a thing like, okay, do you get this money that's available to you, or do you make some other trade-offs that may or may not be in your favor, whether it is, a job or whatever the case may be. Not going to say, because you have to read the book to find it.
Yeah, I know it's hard to talk about it without.
I'm going to talk about it, but just understand that sometimes, that there can be trade-offs that we have to make, to decide, okay, I could do this or I could do that, and which one is going to, have, potentially be helpful or hurtful. Because like you said, it's not just about the money, it's about, the spiritual aspect. And it is also, and it comes up a lot in the book, it's about getting some money, but it's also about, is there true forgiveness?
Mm-hmm. And what does that mean? And is that possible? Yeah.
Right. Because there was a statement, actually, I'm one of the ones that I marked, where it says, can forgiveness be political, and can it be lasting?
Yeah. Well, and I also wanted to explore what forgiveness means in the context of the person who is harmed still has to do the work to forgive. And so you see that with the family, with all the families, everyone has to prove that they're eligible for forgiveness, which is an ironic concept, but not unlike, it's not hard to imagine that would be the case in this country, right? Where maybe an apology is issued, but the burden is still on Black people to sort of do that work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. As it is, and some of the things that we have to deal with, thinking back to 2020, and as you mentioned, you were writing the book in that time frame, and all of the things that were happening, and how the so-called racial reckoning, a lot of the burden was put on Black people, to try to explain and to help us to understand, and how can we do better, and how can we be better, versus necessarily taking responsibility and, not trying to ask us to do additional labor.
Right. Especially in, a lot of corporate jobs, I think, saw that, where it's like, all of it was sort of put on the Black employees to like help people get through it. So.
And that is a thing that unfortunately happens a lot. We also see, of course, if something like this were to pass, like in this book, everybody's not going to be happy about it. And then there's also that. And that part of the book actually made me think a lot about the civil rights movement. People are going for certain things, and certain new things are being awarded or rewarded, whatever word you want to use. And they don't like it, and they're going to fight against it. They're going to buck against it. They're going to lash out. So there's also that aspect of maybe why some people might not want, certain rights, or they might not want, this money or whatever, because they're afraid of what repercussions might be.
Yeah, or like the different ways to achieve it, like, MLK versus Malcolm X, the different sort of viewpoints on how do you get to the end point or end goal.
So as you've been out and about talking about the story, what are some of the biggest things that people are really resonating with some of your readers that you've met thus far?
Well, I love how it has inspired people to retrace their own family history. I didn't really anticipate the extent to which so many readers have connected with that part of the book. So I love that.
And you're going to continue your process too, right?
Yeah, I am. My grandmother passed away, unfortunately, but so I saved I have like voice memos of her sort of like explaining the history, and I just have to sort of get the emotional capacity to dive back in. Yeah.
Yeah. That's hard.
But that has been really nice to hear from readers that's resonated, and also the extent to which people are critically thinking about a federal reparations program. That's been nice to hear. And it hasn't been so much. I was nervous about a negative reception of just reparations. That's crazy. And I haven't really heard that. It's more, okay, well, how could this work? And this is actually making me think about what it could look like. So that's been nice.
Yeah, that is good, because I've heard and seen different things come up about it, but honestly, in reading this book, it does make me want to learn more about that as well, because it might not happen in my lifetime, but
it might.
It might, yeah, you never know, because I'm still young. Because hey, we didn't think we were going to see a Black president, so you just never know.
It's a lot hinges, I think, on this next election.
On this next election. Oh, and that is another thing. I did not bring that up. That the president is a woman, and so obviously everything was intentional. But I'm thinking, and maybe I'm wrong, that maybe a woman might have more sensitivities, or is that why it was a woman?
Yes. Yeah. And the president in the book feels like a deep personal responsibility because of her ancestor, Andrew Johnson. So, in imagining what would have to be true for a federal program to pass, I imagined that a person in power, the most powerful person, would have to have some sort of deep personal responsibility in order to move this forward.
And I liked seeing a female as the president, a woman as the president.
So crazy to imagine.
Right. Yeah, especially like thinking about when you were, well, we would have already gone past Hillary, but just the thought we could have had.
Yeah. When I was writing it, Elizabeth Warren was still very much a focus or an option. But.
Yeah, so to think that so many other nations, even some that would be considered third world, have had women presidents. So I'm just saying we need to play catch up here in this nation. The right woman, though. We don't need not just a figurehead, but the right type of woman.
Right.
Be clear about that. So yeah. So in terms, I have something else we're going to talk about. I already told you what I want to talk about, but in terms of like your activities or any events or things coming up where you're really getting out into the world and talking about acts of forgiveness, where are some of the places that you might be in the upcoming days and weeks where people can learn more or come get their book signed?
Yeah, I am doing a Lit Friday at the August Wilson African American Center on, I think it's next Friday, and that's virtual. And then, well, they can come to my bookstore to get their book
Right.
signed.
Yeah, that's where we're going.
Yeah, but I think I believe I will be at the Mississippi Book Festival, but that's not until I think it's September.
Okay.
But yeah.
All right. Well, everyone, you can follow Maura, on her Instagram, Twitter, follow the website to get more insight into some of the things that she has going to talk about acts of forgiveness, which I'm going to show it to you again. This is a early copy, but it does still look like
It looks the same.
it looks the same. Mine just has a little different binder on it. But yes, I really suggest that you read it because there's so many like today real world things that are coming up, whether it's how Black people are treated, by the police. There's all the things about reparations, finances, class. There's just so many different things that come up in the context of the book that are education, how children are being educated about our history, all of those things that are like real world. So the fact that you did not put a date on it was very smart because it was very like this could be happening right now. So I definitely appreciate that. So I do suggest that you grab a copy, but I would be remiss if we did not talk about what you just said. Your bookstore. This is Book Bar.
Yes. Yep. So we're opening in Brooklyn in June. It's named after my grandmother, Elizabeth.
Aww.
And yeah, so it will have about 4,000 titles and then also sell coffee, beer, and wine. So please, whoever's in Brooklyn, please come by, and we can't wait to meet everyone.
All right. So what was the inspiration? I know you said it's named after your grandmother. So what is it about your grandmother that inspired you to want to open a bookstore and name it after her?
Oh, she's the reason that I'm a writer and that I love reading because we were always just going to bookstores and spending time there. And she was always like shoving books at me. So yeah, that's why it's named after her. But yeah, I've always just wanted to create a space that feels welcoming, that brings people in, that creates sort of a common place where people can go and talk about books and meet neighbors. And yeah, so it just felt right to name it after her, especially the timing of finding the space and then having my book coming out. And yeah, she's no longer with us, but it just felt like the right way to honor her.
I love that. Because I will often tell people I'm an avid reader because of my dad. So I definitely get that there can be people who really inspire you in that way to to dive into books and all that. I know she's gonna be proud of she's already proud of everything that you're doing.
Thank you.
But just to see that, and the fact that, as I mentioned before we came on, you're like birthing two babies, but not at the same time this year. So, what has that process been like? Just navigating the world of, having your debut novel come out and all the work and promotion with that, and then at the same time starting a new business.
I feel really grateful. I feel really overwhelmed, but also very grateful. And it's interesting being able to see the whole industry from different sides. And so I feel like I'm learning a lot in terms of, how the publishing industry works from both like the creative author side of things, but also, selling the books. So yeah, it's been interesting.
Yes, a learning experience. That's kind of how I feel even doing this because I love to read, but so doing and being able to bring wonderful authors such as yourself here, I have to work behind the scenes with publicists and publishers, and it's a lot of different things that go into that. Sometimes not so much agents because that's a different type of role, but but just really being able to dive in and see how things work. So for someone who may be a budding author or bookstore owner, are there any words of wisdom or words of advice that you may have?
Just dive in. Figure it out as you're going. Yeah, I think. Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, for the book, I just wrote 1,000 words a day and just kept going. And I think it's kind of the similar with the bookstore. I'm just kind of figuring it out as I'm going. So hopefully just keep going.
Just keep going. That's it. Just do it, as Mikey would say. Do it and don't give up. And I will add in my 2 cents. I would agree with that. Just start. Because sometimes you can have this perfected vision in your mind of what everything is supposed to be, and sometimes you just have to get started, and you can revise as you go. You can edit as you go. You can pivot as you go, but to get started, because if you have something wonderful that just is like in here and it's burning in here, and you got to get it out, or you got to release it. So just get started. So Maura, I really do thank you for your time. I know you are a lady. So I'm glad that you were able to come here and talk to us about acts of forgiveness. And I really do suggest people get it, because there's a lot of food for thought. I think it's good for book clubs, traditional book clubs, because you all can sit and work through it and talk through those things and really figure out some of these concepts. And it may move some people to action as well, to say, what they making sure we're getting the right people in place to, help, move some things along for us. So
thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Don't hang up just yet. I'm going to let you go so you can get your water, whatever the case may be. But thank you to everyone for watching. And I do definitely suggest that you visit and put the book bar back up there again, so you can go there and get that address. So once it opens, you know where to go, but just continue to follow Maura, and you'll be able to get more information as the actual date of opening gets closer. So just hold on for me for 1 second, and then I'll be right back with you. So to everyone, thank you so much for watching this evening. It was really great to talk to Maura. As I said, I enjoyed the book immensely, and it really has me thinking about what's next for myself in terms of family history and all of that. So yes, to learn from the characters in the story and be inspired by their journey, but also to consider our own journeys, whether it's researching our history or being a part of some of the processes that help us to get some things moved along in terms of reparations or other things that serve a benefit to us as a community. So I would encourage you to do that. So just to let you know, next week's interview is actually one that I've already recorded, because this young lady actually lives in Berlin, and we had to get the timing just right. So we pre-recorded, and so I won't be with you live next week, but I will be sharing this out. And the book is called Sweetness in the Skin by Ishi Robinson. So that will be our interview for next week. And it's a really wonderful story, a coming of age story about a young lady who lives in Jamaica, and her life and some things that happened with her. So I would really, hope that you can tune into that interview on next Monday. And in the meantime, in between time, I do look forward to seeing you again next Monday and beyond. Actually, on this Wednesday, on the Live Well Sister episode, will be the 200th interview that I have done since I started 4 years ago. And then on April 27th will be the 4-year anniversary of me doing interviews. So there'll be some fun stuff happening between there to celebrate the 200th episode as well as 4 years. So I hope that you all can stay tuned for those things and share them out with your friends and family and other people who love reading books. So without any further delay, I'm going to go ahead and let you go for the night, and we'll see you again real soon. Take good care. Bye-bye.